All right, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are. Welcome to Leaping Off the Page. We are here from the Graphic Novel and Comics Roundtable of the American Library Association. So, if you are here to learn about comics programming ideas for National Library Week, which is coming up, then you are in the right place. I am going to be the moderator slash one of the panelists, and then I'm joined with some of my other fellow comics librarians here. Over the course of the next half an hour or so, we're just going to enthusiastically share with you because we've probably all three of us done a lot of the programming ideas that we have for um, you know, 1, 2 day quick things that you may be able to do during National Library Week. And hopefully, this gives you some ideas that come from us and that come from others. So, we want to encourage people to participate. As we go through, we're going to run straight through our slide deck and presentation and do questions at the end. But Shira is going to add links to the chat as we go to things that are relevant. And if you have some links that you want to add as we're discussing that are relevant, please feel free to put those in there. And Liz is going to pay attention to the questions that pop up so that when we get to the end, we can make sure that if we haven't handled it already in the conversation, we can get to it. So that's how it's going to go. Am I driving the bus? Should I pull up or Liz, are you
Go
doing
ahead.
the slides?
Either way, I have it
If
ready
you,
if you need it.
yeah, if you could do it, that would be cool.
You got it.
Hello to everybody in the chat. I see Robin likes horror comics. Somebody's curious to know what librarians are looking for and build programs around that.
Where'd the share go? Oh no. I
Okay,
swear I've done this before. There it is, the big green button. All right. There we go.
all right. All right, so we're going to go ahead and go through our presenters, and we're going to start off with our president.
Hi, everyone. My name is Shira Pilarski. I use they and them pronouns. I am the humanities librarian at University of North Carolina, Wilmington, and I am for a couple more months, the president of the Graphic Novels and Comics Roundtable. And what I'm reading there is War on Gaza by Joe Sacco.
Hi, I'm Liz Brown. I use she, her pronouns. I am currently the outreach librarian at the University of Colorado. Formerly, I worked at the Baltimore County Public Library, and I am the Lib Comics Committee co-chair. So we are the committee in GNCRT that helps to organize virtual presentations like this webinar, and also more casual virtual events.
And my name is Demosa Weber Bay. I use she, her pronouns. I am a member at large, so I'm on the exec board and I work with these guys on the Graphic Novel and Comics Roundtable. And in my day job, I am a librarian at Scholastic, where I'm in charge of the archive. But a lot of what I will be talking to you about today is from my time working at the Rio Rancho Public Library. That's where I started my library career as a teen librarian, and also when I was a teacher working at the Native American Community Academy in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and PS 328 in Brooklyn, New York. So we wanted to start off the hour, in case you have to tune out early, with going through some examples of library comics programs that we have done. So if you got a pen and pencil or you're taking notes on an iPad or on screen, this is the moment to get yourself together. Next slide, please. Go ahead, Liz.
So I'm sharing two examples of programs from one that I've done is an in-person program that I did when I was working for the public library. The other is an example of the virtual programs that I've been helping to organize for GNCRT. I will also throw out that I have helped to organize comic conventions in the library, but that felt like a little too big for for beginner programming. But if you do have any questions about that, I'm happy to answer that during the Q&A portion. So the first one is a drawing battle presentation that I did with the group Super Art Fight. I'll drop a link in the chat momentarily. That is a local group to DC and Baltimore, Maryland. So they are a collective of artists. They have all developed their own kind of personas, kind of like in the style of pro wrestling. My favorite is Stompalodon, the Afroed dinosaur, but they also have artists with personas like Shoujo Agogo and just all kinds of really funny ideas. And then what they do is they come up with a prompt generator, which you kind of see projected in the background of that middle picture there. So audiences can suggest different drawing prompts. Pictured there is X-Men, Days of Our Lives, or It's a Duck. Just random wacky things, call outs to pop culture and meme. And so each artist gets a pull from the Wheel of Death, that prompt generator, and they have to draw that prompt. And then they also have to make their drawings interact in some way. So their drawings are kind of fighting on the paper. You can kind of see some of the examples there. We've got like Spider-Man, we've got just a side of beef for some reason. And like, it's really fun. And it's a timed drawing exhibition. So everyone gets about 5 to 15 minutes, depending on the round, to complete their drawing and then make their drawings interact in some way. They also have a hype man / MC who's kind of narrating, getting the audience pumped up. And at the end, the MC kind of does a cheer meter to see who has won that round. And so it kind of goes through a bracket depending on how complex it is. We hosted them in the library. They worked great with us. They very much used to coming into the library. They typically do this presentation in bars and anime conventions or comic conventions. They were very great and very accommodating when we said we need this to be a family-friendly event.
Yeah.
So they, the Wheel of Death became the Wheel of Doom, and they filtered out some of the more mature drawing prompts. I think this is definitely something that you can kind of take and run with. If I have heard of other drawing groups and artists kind of doing this in collectives, artist collectives in Chicago, in LA, around San Diego. So if you see that happening in your area, it might be worth reaching out to see if they'd be wanting to come to the library. It's also something I think you could figure out how to do within your own library community. So if you have a teen group who's really into drawing, why not set this as an activity for them and adapt it for them? And it's something where you can there's different points of entry. So you have your artists, but you also have people who are making suggestions for what the drawing prompts could be. And that's kind of like a crowdsourcing activity that you can do even virtually over social media.
This is really cool.
It was a lot of fun. It was very confusing to some of the audience at first who weren't who weren't currently aware of like what they were supposed to be doing. We did have to plant some of the more noisier librarians in the audience to sort of make people feel comfortable. Like, oh yeah, you can cheer and like shout out, and like it's supposed to be an engaging performance. So yeah, putting in some plants in the audience was really helpful for kind of getting everyone accustomed and like, oh, we don't have to be quiet this time. I'm very much a person who gets shushed as opposed to doing the shushing.
I've been shushed as a librarian. I think I heard once that you're not a real librarian until you've been shushed by your patrons.
That has happened to me many times. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the dramatic comics reading is what we have been organizing on GNCRT. So the gaming roundtable, who we work very closely with, has been organizing roundtable spectaculars every year. So they get as many of the roundtables in ALA to participate as possible. We're an early adopter for them. And then we all kind of organize our own engaging programming about a media of choice. The very last one we did was international media. We've done queer media. We've done superhero media. The one we have planned coming up in October probably will probably be around intellectual freedom and challenge media. I think that's
Yeah.
to be confirmed, but coming up, very relevant these days. And so GNCRT's participation in that has been to reach out to comic artists that we have connections with and ask them to do a dramatic reading of their comics. This idea is actually borrowed from R. Sikarak, who has been organizing comics carousels at comics conventions that he attends. He basically does the same thing. He reaches out to comic artists and he asks, can you please present
Hmm.
some of your comics, about 15 minutes worth? And so we'll project the comic in some way, and then you get to do the reading. So you can do character voices, you can read the sound effects, and it's really fun to see like how artists kind of envision their comics off of the page. It's really
Hmm.
we had Shannon Waters and Brandon Boyle White read Hollow, and they actually teamed up with a friend of theirs who did podcasting. So they kind of pre-recorded it, but they did all this Foley work for the sound effects, and it was really fun. Pictured here is two of the artists for the work Kinsey for, which one was that? The Super Spectacular. So Sebastian Cadillac and Kit Steinkellner, but two of the writers for the comic Kinsey. Um, they kind of divvied up all of the characters and did a live reading.
Hmm.
And then at the very end, we kind of have a sort of typical Q&A with the author wrap up. Um, Yeah, and I think it's a really engaging way to sort of introduce people to the comic's work. You don't have to have read the comic in advance to be able to participate. This kind of gives people a cheat code to,
Hmm.
access the work. And like I said, it's just really fun to see artists representing, the character voices, and you kind of get to talk about the behind the scenes and how they made different creative choices.
That's fantastic. I'm sure a lot of people are wondering how you do the reading when it's
Mhm.
visual, so thank you for spelling out exactly how it
Yeah.
works.
And we'll drop links in the chat. All of those readings have been recorded and uploaded to GameRT's YouTube channel, so you can watch them later.
That's good. Okay. And then, so if you have questions for Liz, please put them in the chat and we'll come to them at the end. This slide is one that I put together, and the left side, the pink ones, these are things that I did while I was at the public library in Rio Rancho, New Mexico. So, kind of going around the 24/7 hour comics day is a borrowed event. That's both of these in the box are a borrowed events. It's a worldwide uh, phenomenon that takes place on the first Saturday in October, where people sit down in, libraries, community centers, arts places, schools, and universities, whichever organizations choose to be a site for it. And people try to draw 24 pages in 24 hours. And you can see in the middle, my one of the fruits of my labor, the robot alien space comic. I promise you, when you're working under a time crunch, you certainly end up kind of going for some of the most basic tropes in, comics and or science fiction or fantasy that you know of. But what's fun about it is that it kind of gets people away from that fear of the blank page, kind of like when you're writing and you have writer's block. And so if you're somebody who aspires to be a comics artist, you may have, drawing block. And so with drawing 24 pages in 24 hours, you're doing it with a community of people. And so you can get up and walk around, see what other people are doing. You have your music and your headphones. You might get ideas from other people. And you just have a good time. Folks who finish, they can send it to the official organizers. And I believe they create an anthology every year of stuff that comes out of that. And the seven part, turning it into 24/7, is because when I was working at the elementary school, I figured, a way to just modify the program so that it would work in the school day. And so took a 24-hour event, turned it into a 7-day event, and I did it like a school trip. And so the kids who were in my library, I had, kind of like a library club, and others who were interested in this event, they got filled out permission slips that as if it was a real trip, so that they would be spending the day in the library, and they had permission from their teachers and their parents to miss classwork that day. And I had a lesson plan, complete with the objectives, which, of the learning standards, at the time New York City, for the state and above, that the whole event addressed, so that there was kind of educational efficacy, in there. And we tried to just draw 7 pages in 7 hours, and, took a lunch break, went to the cafeteria, and at the end of the day, the kids went home. Free Comic Book Day, skipping down below 24/7. That's one that, again, takes place throughout the world. It's an event on the first Saturday of May every year. The comics industry, makes comics specifically for this day. Artists draw storylines and, little zines and stuff like that. They're specific. And then sometimes they're teasers for stuff that's going to be coming out. And the comic book stores, generally the ones who do this, and they're able to get these comics at extremely cheap prices. I feel like when I was doing this, which again was about 10 years ago, it's like 10 cents a comic or something like that. And so for that, I partnered with a local comic book shop and got in on his order of comics for Free Comic Book Day. And in return for, I think, I give him $25, and I'm able to get, now I should be able to do the math quickly, 100 comics, right? But then that math was wrong. But then he stamped the name of his comic book shop on each of the comics, and so that's how it was marketing for him. And then if I come around to the other side, another example of, like Liz was talking about working with partners, the comics, I see in the comments that it's 25 to 50 cents now per comic. I did get the Friends group of the library, I should note, to sponsor that event, so that they were the ones who purchased or paid for the comics. I had proposed, a thing for our Friends group. Once a month, they would approve programming and things that they would support, financially. The comics drawing workshop, similar to what Liz said, I did some research and found a local group called 7000 BC in New Mexico, northern New Mexico, comic book artists and writers. Went to one of their meetings, hung out with them, and became a member of the group. Even though I'm not in New Mexico, I am still a member of this organization. And they came to the library and did a 3-hour workshop with anybody who signed up. We had a limit, but that was just a simple event with people who were experts, in the field, and took kids through drawing or explaining the basics of pencil, ink, comics grammar, and stuff like that. And then finally in the blue box, this was me pushing myself. Though I am a comics librarian, I don't know as much, or certainly 10 years ago, about manga as I was, comfortable and familiar with more traditional comics and graphic novels. But I had a manga advisory group within the library of kids who were basically the ones who were always handing me lists of manga that I needed to purchase. And these are 2 events that we came up with as a group to support our manga collection. So the manga book swap reflected the fact that I couldn't afford to buy as much manga as the kids wanted to read. And so we came up with an event where people would bring in manga that they had already read, and then they could trade it with each other so that they would have opportunities, to read each other's materials. And with that one, I again partnered with a local comic book shop. This was the Comic Warehouse in Albuquerque, specifically, and he went through his collection and donated some materials that he had that would kind of seed a basic collection, a pile of books that I would have as the librarian that I could trade. And then the kids each kind of came with their backpacks. And it was really cool to see. Some people were intimidated to kind of walk up to the front, but there were groups and corners of the library doing private trades over the course of the whole afternoon, just making friends and passing, comics between each other. And so it kind of spread out of the room and became this phenomenon in the library of people reading, manga and trading it with each other. And then finally, the Art Expo, you see a picture down there, and there was a picture earlier in the slide deck. This one, we encourage people who are fans of manga art, but this could really be any comic art, in general. It doesn't have to be a particular style, to submit artwork to the library. It was for kids specifically. They dropped it off at the library. There's a young woman who is now a librarian. She went to school and this was her baby. She framed all of them and we hung them up, so that's where our kind of cost came in. And then we did a silent auction so that people could purchase this artwork. The kid could indicate if it was for sale or not. And if they did sell it, then a percentage of the money went towards buying more manga for the collection. They didn't have to sell it. Of course, we pack it up, we give it back to them. I have some of this artwork hanging in my house right now. I've got a ninja on a fence sneaking into a complex of some sort that's hanging in my kitchen that is from this art show. And what was really cool was that a lot of parents and grandparents and teachers came in on the side, during the day and on the weekends without the kids, so that they could bid on the artwork, secretly so that their child would be surprised, or their student would be surprised when they came back and found out that somebody purchased their artwork for $50 or for $100 or something like that. So that was fun, and we'll stop there.
Hi, everyone. I really quickly, when you were talking about Free Comic Book Day, I was reminded of how sometimes I've also had weeded, like graphic novels that I add to it. So that's a way to kind of beef up your Free
Yeah.
Comic Book Day giveaways. So the first thing that I want to talk about is I was very inspired by if you haven't seen the National Library Week art, which is by the honorary chairs, Scott McCloud and Raina Telgemeier. They actually have this new book called The Cartoonist Club. And truly, I don't work for Scholastic. So you could take that to mean I genuinely loved this book.
I loved it too.
um,
It's true.
it's really good. It's if you're not familiar with Raina Telgemeier and Scott McCloud, it's kind of like exactly where their works meet. So it's a relatable story about kids in a cartoonist club in their school, but it also has some of the Scott McCloud, like how to make comics, how to understand comics, and some of the activities that they do in the book that I think are very, very doable. And I've done similar activities with people in public libraries where I've worked. I have this photo over here, Quanto Comics. It's a tweet from Scott McCloud, where basically the idea is in a circle, everyone puts the title of what the comic is going to be with whatever they want the logo to be. It can't be anything too complicated. And then they pass it to the next person and you set a timer. 5-minute timer, 15-minute timer. The point is not to have it be great. The point is to have it be quick, to
Hmm.
think of something quickly and get it on the page quickly. Um, and that, I think when I was thinking about things for this webinar, I was thinking about what are things that don't require a lot of money? And then what are things that if you have some money, you can work with them.
Hmm.
So, so that is one that you just need paper and you just need pencils. It's funny, actually, Liz, that you say Exquisite Corpse because I was going to talk about Exquisite Corpse as well. And just as kind of heads up, the photo that's on this Wikipedia has boobs in it. So if you're looking at it at work, be mindful of that.
Yeah.
Um, but Exquisite Corpse was basically, and a lot of people have done this like telephone style with writing, and you could do it as a writing activity as well. But basically, you draw the first couple inches of the piece of paper and just leave a tiny bit at the bottom and fold the rest, and then pass it
Hmm.
on to the next person, and the next person draws from there, and you end up with just beautiful nonsense drawings. But it's a great way to get people to kind of have to think about, how do I make sense of what I'm seeing here? Um, Another thing with the Cartoonist Club is if you have the money and are able to get a lot of different tools of the trade, kind of different types of paper, different weights of paper, different drawing implements, different types of ink. Uh, this is a good place where people can try them out and not spend a ton of money on
Mhm.
things that they don't know are right for them. If you don't have that kind of money, you could have a swap where people come in and bring whatever tools for creating comics they have at home, and you can swap them or let people kind of try them out.
Mhm.
Um, then the comics artist visit, the photo that I have here was, it was actually I almost said webinar, uh, because I live in this post-COVID world where I say webinar all the time. It was a workshop, a comics creating workshop within a Comic Con that I had at my library. I, like Liz, also did like a pretty large scale Comic Con, but I'm kind of thinking about what are the things we can pull together last minute.
Right.
This was a gentleman I knew lived in our community and who made comics, like indie comics, not like mainstream published comics, just makes zines, comic zines, stuff like that. If you have people in your community that you're already aware of, if you don't, and there's a couple towns over, there's a zine fest, definitely in the future, go to the zine fest, look at people who have comics. A lot, network with them. A lot of people are willing to come to the library for like a relatively modest stipend, and work with people, work with young people or older people, show them how to create comics, or talk about what their journey has been like. Sometimes you can also get people, if you're doing a comic or manga book club, you can get the creators to join you. That's often difficult, and it's often only going to be virtual, but it's a thing that you can look into if you have a lot of money. Some libraries do. And then zine making, the last picture I have here is Stolen Sharpie Revolution, which is by a wonderful zinester, Alex Reck, who does the long running zine Brain Scan. It's been published in a number of different editions. I found out it's on LibGen, which is a travesty. Um, if you are interested in making comics in your library, I highly recommend you invest the very small amount of money into buying a copy of this book, because it has every kind of folding method for every kind of zine you would want. Yeah, I think it's
Mm.
15. It has every kind of binding method. It has information about how to get involved in zine communities. It has information about what zine fests are already happening. There are also a lot of comic shops sell zines. And one thing that I think is really cool
Mm.
about that in particular is you can, if you have a cartoonist club, particularly if you have kids that you're working with in a cartoonist club, you can work with them, you can go with them and say, hey, will you sell this kid's mini comics that they have created? And if you have a cool, like quirky comic shop somewhere in your community, I promise you, they'll be like, oh my God, kids' comics, of course.
That is so
Um,
cool.
it is, yeah. I mean, I'm like thinking about Atomic Books in Baltimore, which of course is like
Mhm.
my like one of the coolest places in the world. But there's a lot of cool. I mean, my comic shop here in Wilmington, Memory Lane, is really cool too. Um, and I think I'll look up a couple folding methods for zines and I'll pop them into the chat as well. But I think that was everything I was going to talk about.
Awesome. Thank you. And I appreciate the shout out to Sharpie, well, which is my medium of choice. You guys saw in the robot alien space comic. I tend to show up with I have a toolbox that I used to have as a teacher. It says literacy tools, and it's usually full of, Sharpies and markers. And I brought that to the 24-hour comic book day. To your point, Shira, just to share and just kind of put this toolbox I have down on the table, and then anybody who needs a ruler or a stencil or a Sharpie and crayon, anything that they could just come and use it. And at the end of the day, I took that out. And there's another random idea for you. Get a toolbox, write literacy tools on it, and fill it up with all kind of stuff, like even little dictionaries or post-its, whiteout, those things. So quickly, this slide we've got here for comic book store ideas, and this is just, we're thinking, it's a two-way street. And so within the library, you're holding programs for comics, but there may be the comic book shop that you're partnering with, or a comic book shop in the area that would be interested in working with you. I think a lot of times that we forget what kind of communities, or maybe as librarians we forget, as comic book readers we don't, that there's often a community in the comic book shop, like Shira's saying, that is very encouraging and wants to encourage readers and new readers to come to it wherever it is. And so these are just 3 quick ideas that I put down. Perhaps you could work with your comic book shop for a library card discount, where perhaps maybe just during National Library Week or something like that, if they show their library card in the comic book shop, they could get a discount maybe on one object or on their purchase. The staff favorites display that you may have in the library or in the comic book shop. It could go both ways. You could get librarians to curate something for the comic book shop, or you ask people in the comic book shop to help you curate something in the library, just so that when people come into the comic book shop, they can see some of the comics that have been picked out by the librarians that are favorites, which may be slightly different from the bestsellers that their customers typically go for. And then finally, vend and sponsor. When you heard both Shira and Liz talk about doing comic book conventions at the library and other kind of events where you may have a situation where somebody could set up a table, but like when I did the free comic book day, it was as simple as allowing the guide to stamp his name on his business's name on the comics, and then giving them to me so I can give them away. So just a couple of ideas there. All right, let's go to the next slide, which is what has helped make your library comics program successful. And so we're just gonna kind of give with this next few minutes before we go to questions, just some reasoning. Sometimes you may have to convince the higher ups or the powers that be that this is important and good. And I'll just start off with saying, one of the things I've tried to do to make my library comics program successful is to be all in and fully committed. So you see this picture here of me dressed up as Shuri from Black Panther. And, like I had mentioned with the manga, sometimes, you may be working with a format that you don't necessarily know as well, or you may feel intimidated to, put on your comic book shirt or outfit a particular day. But when you as the librarian fully committed and do something that may seem silly, like wearing a costume at work all day, and this could be during National Library Week, just you could choose to dress that way. It could be for an event, but it's a signal to kids and people who may sometimes feel like the library is not the place for them, or comics readers are not necessarily welcome here. So one of the things I've tried to do, and we're going to go around and talk about this a little bit, is just to be fully committed and to model also what I'm asking folks to do. So if it's 24-hour comic book day or 7-hour comic book day, then I will sit down and try to do it myself. At the same time that I'm walking around and running the event and trying to make sure that everything is happening. I'm also myself as the person, the teacher or the librarian who's doing the event. I will, maybe have chart paper up on the wall or something where, the participants can track and see what I'm doing. And I'm not a great artist, at all. I do stick figures and I use Sharpies, but I know the basic grammar of comics. I had to do the angry eyes and the happy face, and show motion and stuff like that. And so, sometimes if you just, commit and participate and show that you don't have to be an expert in order to enjoy, this format. I think that can help to make the program successful. Puts a smile on people's face when they see you, that you're being silly intentionally.
I just want to second that,
Yeah, go for
Denisa.
it.
I have definitely showed up in my cosplay when I'm presenting about comics at library conventions and things like that to show like I'm willing to go there. I take Miss Frizzle as a style icon. Um, but if you're not like at that level of cosplay, I think even just putting a button or a lanyard of your favorite comic character on your work badge is a way to sort of signal in an everyday context. I have a button that I always have on my that comics are real reading. So that's always like when I'm doing reference or one-on-one with patrons, that's a way to signal to them that I'm an open I'm open for those conversations.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think for me, the one other thing that comes up, like, absolutely, yes. Even if I don't wear cosplay, I'll wear like a geeky t-shirt or something like that, you know? Um, but one of the other things that kind of comes up for me with this is just being adaptable, like knowing that sometimes you're going to have to throw things together last minute, sometimes things are going to have to be small scale, sometimes things can be really big scale, and like basically having that kind of like improv yes and approach to comics programs, I think is like probably the most helpful. Yeah, like maybe this isn't going to work this year, but hopefully it'll work next year, you know?
Mm-hmm. And I had also wanted to emphasize asking, your audience what they're interested in, even if it's, maybe brainstorming at the comic book shop. There's a lot of times where I was in there and I walked in with an idea and I tossed it at the owner of the shop, but also the people who were in the shop hanging out. And they, helped me to kind of come up with some ideas for how I might run something. So the collaboration, to working with the comic book stores, but also like people have mentioned, local comic book groups. Those are things that help be successful. I also once did a survey. This was more recently, but I had the not with Indigenous Comic Con. I was going to say Native American Comic Book Convention, but the title is Indigenous Comic Con, and I run a Facebook group called Native Comic Book Society with some of my former students and colleagues when I was at NACA, the school. And one time, me and my students, we sat there, and mind you, they're no longer my students, these are 30-year-olds. But we did a survey of the people who were at the con just to see what kind of comics people were into, in Albuquerque. What did they like fantasy? Did they like realism? What kind of artwork did they like? Where did they get their comics? How frequently do they read them? Just all of these different types of questions that would help us with collection development, as librarians, but would also be helpful as you're trying to plan programs and see what kind of stuff people are into. And, any event that you have during National Library Week is always an opportunity to have a survey, even if it's something, a quick piece of paper or something online. You could have a questions, that people could toss into a jar in the library while they're there or something like that. And, this week, National Library Week could be an opportunity for you to also kind of canvas and get information and see, what your comics readers are interested in for future, programs and stuff like that. Is there anything else that you guys wanted to add about success?
I think building those community partnerships is incredibly important. I will share that I've had some comic book store partnerships that have gone really well and some
Mm-hmm.
that have never gotten off the ground. Sort of the ones that never got off the ground, the comic book store felt like we were in competition with them,
Mm-hmm.
specifically during Free Comic Book Day. And so it was definitely a learning curve to take in their perspective and to hear from them. But it took kind of some tenacity and not giving up on wanting to celebrate Free Comic Book Day. Um, I also think I like your idea of like surveying and sort of talking with the partnerships with within comic stores, because something I see a lot of is that more and more comic customers are families. So they're grown-ups are already comic fans and they want to bring their kids into the fold and into the hobby. And I some comic stores are more equipped to respond to that than others. Libraries can help them kind of be that bridge that the
Mhm.
families within their customer base are looking for. You know, we're already well equipped to deal with intergenerational families with young kids. So I think, you know, finding out your niche and sort of your role in the partnership is really important and kind of worth developing and thinking about a little more intentionally. Um, yeah. Anything you
No,
want to add, Sheila?
your point about intergenerational, I think, is also key. That one of the things that does make these programs successful a lot of the time is that it appeals across generations. And you have someone who's an avid fan who's been, reading comics and or making them for years, who the enthusiasm that comes out of them as they're sharing, this with the next generation, and then you as the librarian creating that opportunity for them to meet each other, and then you're creating like the reading list that this young reader is going to need as they go through the steps till they become that person who knows the entire arc and storyline of this DC thing and that Marvel thing and this movie and TV shows integrated and all of that with the actual comics. You see the beginning of the journey and you see the person, and the continuum can be very exciting, and it's really good intergenerational library programming in general.
Yeah,
All
when
right. Oh, go
we
ahead.
did
Yeah.
the free comic book day, the way we started off trying to get the free comics that you pay for. And what eventually happened as we were kind of having these discussions every year with the comic book store is we stopped doing the free comics because we're giving out free comics 24/7. Like that's already the library's thing. What we did is we wound up, because it was very close, it was like in a walkable distance from the library to the comic book store. We left the distributing free comics that you can own up to the comic book store, and we did the programming. And so we
Mhm.
had this interchange of people who they went to the comic book store, they grabbed their free comics, and then they saw, oh, there's a program at the library that I want to see. It's a cosplay workshop. It's the drawing battles. And then after they got their comics, they came over to the library. And then people who came to the library saw the cool thing. They're like, oh, I can get more comics. Let me go to the comic book store. And we kind of had this nice reciprocal relationship that took some time to develop, but we got
Right.
there eventually.
No, that sounds great. And your point that we're giving away free comics all the time is well taken. Uh, all right, let's jump to the next slide. Make sure we have time for questions. Why hold comic themes programs in the library? We're just going to give you a couple of quick numbers because sometimes you need something that is quantitative as well as qualitative. This image is from a program that was at the Library of Congress down there on the bottom. So if you switch to the next slide. Sherry, you want to go first? I think that one I pulled.
Sure. You obviously see that in 2018, this poll conducted by YouGov says that I feel like I'm just going to read it out loud.
Yeah.
And theoretically, you can read that. We do have a lot of statistics in here. I think the reason that we wanted to do this is because there are still directors and department heads in libraries that still don't think that this is important. And
Yeah.
yeah, I think honestly, Demosa and Liz can probably speak to that better than I can.
I mean, I haven't run into as much resistance, although I feel like I'm constantly surprised. You kind of get that feeling like, oh, we still have to convince folks that comics have a place in the library and that, we should have them in the collection and all of that. So, some of the points, that I've got, mine are, I think, towards the end, is just showing like the way that they circulate. And I think that this is quantitative and qualitative. If you have had comics and graphic novels, in your collection, then you know that after a few circulations, they sometimes, they're starting to show the wear and tear because people are going through them quickly. And, you may have a large collection with a lot of materials in it, and then you'll find that the graphic novels are circulating heavier than some of the other stuff. So in the if you were to make a case for circulation numbers, and increasing the circulation in your collection, then having, a library comics program that highlights that you have the comics and gets them circulating, could be something that convinces, someone that it's important to have library programs. Yeah, I'm not going to read all of the different things, but that definitely I think is something that may seem, like I've heard it and I know it before, but it's definitely worth, sharing and just stating out loud again that lifting up these materials in the collection can improve circulation numbers in a really big way. Is there anything that you want to add, Liz, on this slide?
Not at the moment. There's some, I want to make sure we have time for the questions that are popping up in chat. So
All right, sounds
let's keep
good.
going.
Yeah, no, you guys can, there we go. So we wanted to put a shout out to the Programming Librarian blog because some of us in the Graphic Novel and Comics Roundtable have been adding programming ideas there. So you heard from the three of us with the ones that we presented, and then there are, I'm guessing 1,000. Are there 1,000 or so comics librarians out there in GNCRT? Maybe more.
More than that, yeah.
Yeah. And so we had put a call to the newsletter, the Graphic Novel and Comics Roundtable, and then folks put things into Programming Librarian. So that website there you see at the bottom, there's three that are kind of at the top of the slide because they were recently added. But one of the cool things about Programming Librarian, if you haven't used it before, is that you can use filters to help you to kind of search through all of the programming ideas that people are sharing so that you can determine, if this is a, program based on the audience and kind of thing that you were doing. And then I think that's it. If we go to the next slide, right? So we're just going to kind of end with some basic information for National Library Week. As we had stated earlier, Raina Telgemeier and Scott McCloud, who combined their powers, their superpowers, to write the Cartoonist Club, write and illustrate it. They're going to be the honorary chairs April 6 to 12, 2025. And over the course of that week, there are different, kind of specialty themes for each day. And the website for National Library Week has all of the materials that you need to promote and celebrate. And then this webinar that we are doing right now is going to be up as a recording. So folks who missed it will have an opportunity to connect there. And now we're going to do some questions.
So,
There we go.
so there's a couple quick ones in the
Yeah.
Q&A, and then we had a less quick one in the chat. Liz, you talked about the society site for bandes dessinées. Would you be able to type that into the Q&A?
Just dropping it now
Oh,
in the
dropping
chat.
it.
Yeah.
Okay. I had missed the title when you said it
Nope, no
before.
worries.
Okay. And then how long were the drawing battles?
So I believe they did each round as 5 minutes, but there's like filler in between as like you explain what's going on and things like that. And it's multiple rounds. So I think like the drawing itself probably was only 30 minutes, but there's lots of things happening in between, you know. Something else I forgot to mention is like and when we had the drawing battle, we did do that for Free Comic Book Day. Again, it was kind of that programming that kind of drew people over from the comic book store. The finished drawings we got to keep. So we hung them up in the library after the event happened, and like we have a long hallway to the meeting room. So we just filled the long hallway with these giant sheets of paper with crazy drawings on them. And so even after the event happened, we had people wandering by for story time and like, that's weird. What was that all about? And asking questions about the program.
Awesome. So we had a question from Megan that I am now putting back in the chat. I'm interested in encouraging comics readership on a college campus, but the culture and library goals can be different for academic libraries. Has anyone done a program at an academic library, and what are your tips for that? Now, I am an academic librarian as of this year, so I can speak to, certainly I do have faculty who are interested in comics and zine integration in their classes, and I do try to work with them in those kinds of situations. But with regards to programs, I don't know. Liz, have you had any?
I've had a couple things. I have 1 year ahead of you in terms of being an academic librarian for 2 years now. So some of the things we've done is we work really closely with our multicultural center, and they're very invested in discussing banned books. So we had a virtual author visit from Ryan Estrada, who did the Banned Books Club and has had other book comics come out since then. He is very generous and a very big advocate for intellectual freedom. So we hosted an author visit from him, talking about his book, The Banned Books Club, with our students. We also how long ago? I guess it was last February. A friend of mine who worked in a different department had a connection to a local comic artist who talked about comics and restorative justice. So the comic artist had been locked up, and that's when he really got into comics. He had time to draw his comic, and then when he got out, he started publishing his comic. So he was what we did is we really embedded that in specific programs to make sure we had a guaranteed audience. So we connected with English faculty who taught creative writing, and then we connected with our social work faculty who were interested in sort of topics about restorative justice. And then we coordinated to have the artist come and talk about his experience in a couple different, and I think it was over 2 days. He gave 3 different presentations about his comic and his time being incarcerated to these classes who we kind of had faculty buy-in for. So I really emphasize kind of working those one-on-one connections you have with faculty members, trying to see, hey, when does your class meet? Can you come to the library to do this author visit? Or that's really been sort of the hallmark that has gotten butts in seats for the programs we've done like that. They are, I feel like, a little more of the traditional author talk that we're kind of all used to. But I think it's definitely a place to grow. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I inherited a lot of programs from my predecessor. So I feel, at least for now, like I already have too many programs, but I would like to start doing more with comics. And I do already do like a pretty decent amount with zines, which has been nice. We have a question from Zainab. I hope that I am pronouncing your name correctly. As an indie publisher making a name for ourselves in the graphic novel space, what can Anik Press do more to support comics librarians? We love comics. I don't know.
That's
That's a,
awesome. I
yeah,
mean,
that's a very cool.
yeah, I think that, I mean, certainly, yeah, I'm thinking of like, when you get to like cons and stuff like that, I think that there's a real opportunity for, the people want to, when they go to a con, there's this like certain magic about meeting, creators and, publishers and being able to even, coming from the world of publishing, people always want to know how do you get published? How do you, you know, like what's a manuscript like idea look like, for comics and stuff like that. So I think that there's the idea of, yeah, something like a con where you have a table and you're promoting the wares, and it may be easier as an indie comics publisher to get to local library systems and stuff like that. But you guys would probably also be a really good partner for some of the programming that we were talking about, that's for the comics readers, in libraries where they're wondering like, how do you do it? A lot of people, we love to read comics, but we don't know how to sketch out, how to storyboard, the grammar of it. And then for people who truly want to get published, that like, is there an agent involved? Do you write it out as a script, and then get the illustrator to do it? Do you draw, so I think that some of those nuts and bolts that indie publishers that you guys know, there may be opportunities to partner with libraries and just help feed that interest and get your materials in front of people as you teach them the magic of how to break into the industry.
Yeah, I would say also, just thinking about it in terms of if you have local schools local public libraries, local universities that you are able to reach out to, or if there are library, like a state library
Yeah.
association, that there's a smaller conference, and seeing if there's any kind of ability to collaborate with people there. That's a good way to kind of help the comics librarians, but also help yourself, which I think
Hmm.
is the goal. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think going to your local library and saying, "Hey, I'm a
Hmm.
comics publisher. Let's do something cool together," is always a great way to start out. Those local conferences are great. The ALA also has its annual conference. We have an exhibitor hall, and so you can kind of and that circles around the country. So it'll be in Philadelphia in the fourth this summer. But when you see those we do have a comics grove specifically for publishers who are looking to get their material into libraries. So participating in our annual conference is another way. I know the Gaming Roundtable is for this forthcoming summer is looking to sort of make connections with a Philadelphia game store. I think we already have our vendor, but just I think that's the kind of model of when we librarians are in a town for a conference, we can reach out to the local game store to see what can we do a
Hmm.
social meetup or something like that. I know that's been done at different conferences in the past as well.
Hmm.
We had, I'm typing things in the chat, but we had Lauren asked, I was going to ask what everyone's favorite review sources or publishers are for knowing what comics slash graphic novels are coming out soon. And we talked, Megan said, no flying, no tights. I'm in the process of typing into the chat, but I can just say it out loud. Some smaller or indie publishers or self pubs, you could do like Patreon sign up, either individually or if you have the ability to do institutional. There was in the fall, there was a great GNCRT session on doing collecting crowdfunded comics, that I'll try to track down the YouTube link. And I know Silver Sprocket is an indie publisher that has a subscription box, and it's wonderful. It's like Christmas every month when it comes to my house. And I'm Jewish, but I love it.
Hmm. Yeah, no, review sources for, certainly comics can sometimes, be hard, and I understand, sometimes people need to have those reviews in order to, for collection development. Sometimes you have to have like two or three, reviews in certain sources in order for a book to go into a thing. So I just also wanted to encourage everybody who is participating. I know, we're hovering around 64 right now with the three of us, like 61. But just to volunteer and like seek those opportunities to review comics, certainly ones from the big publishers and also independent publishers and stuff like that, so that our reviews as librarians get into some of these big review journals and other places. And there are, much like Robin, folks who are creating their own spaces to review and share, information and stuff like that. And then I often, when I was really trying to see what a comic would be about, because I felt I had to be careful with the teen collection when I was a teen librarian, is I did look at the reviews on like Goodreads and Amazon and places like that. And sometimes I will totally, I still do this. I go to the 1-star review, 2-star reviews for a book, because I find that even if they're being critical, people will tell you what's happening in the book. Like they will give you a lot of detail about the book as they tell you why they do or do not like it. So, certainly as I was trying to get a sense of what I was purchasing from the library, I did use the crowdsourced reviews, of Goodreads and so.
Can I
And
really
just to
quickly say
Yeah,
one
go for
thing?
it.
I'm
Yeah.
really, really sorry. I if you review comics for a publisher, which you can review comics for School Library Journal. I review comics for Kirkus, for instance. If you do, please talk about the art
Yeah.
and lettering, because I hate when comics reviews don't mention the art or lettering or color. It really upsets me. So please talk about it.
Hmm.
Okay? Thank you. Sorry.
it's important, and that's how some
No
people
problem.
determine what they'll read. Some people do only like certain art styles or things like that, and that the reader does care. So yeah, definitely.
I know Booklist also has their graphic novel special edition. That is an initiative that GNCRT is kind of working on to get more just more comic reviews out there in general. So do keep an eye out on GNCRT channels for those writing opportunities. And I'll just throw in, we're at time, but I'll throw in really quickly. I'm also a reviewer for the International Journal of Comic Arts. So on the more academic side of things, that's a resource that you can find for those kind of reviews in a more academic and scholarly context.
Awesome. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for coming and tuning in. Whether you're here, synchronous with us or asynchronous, watching later on, we really appreciate it. I just want to reiterate that, National Library Week is April 6th to 12th. The hosts are going to be Raina Telgemeier and Scott McLeod. We're very excited in the Graphic Novel and Comics Roundtable to support this, and we thank the American Library Association for bringing comics to the forefront this year. If you need any other resources from our peers, the fellow library comics readers out there, go to the American Library Association website, look for the Graphic Novel and Comics Roundtable page. You will find more information than you need, book lists, programming ideas, videos, all of the stuff. We're putting it out there. We love comics and we want to make sure that we support you. And, if you have any programming questions, please, you can hit us up on our social media channels as well, and somebody can get back to you. So thank you, everybody, for coming today.